Hi all, this is Kevin Bernatz at Doc Beer Nuts Development. We're going to go through onto Paris Combat. I'm just going to walk through a combat and show you how it pretty much works. So in this example, we're going to look at the combat. If you saw the other video where there was the Prussian First Army attacking the French Fourth Corps. I'll note it's a little bit different that when we get into the combat, I'm actually going to have the 1st Cavalry Division involved in the combat. In the other video, it was crossing the pontoon bridge. Really doesn't make that much difference, but we'll resolve it as if it was involved in the combat hacks. So, the French have a single corps involved in the combat, and it's the 4th Corps, which has a total of 6 strength points and is commanded by the Admiral. You could see he is a Empire leader, denoted by the E in the upper right corner. And the +1 means he has a tactical rating of +1, which will affect the combat. The 5 is his tactical rating, or his reaction rating, which was used for him to attempt to react out of the hex. All units, corps, strength points, etc., have artillery, which is sort of abstracted into them. And at the beginning of the game, the artillery suffer from poor artillery fuses. And so whenever there is a combat in clear terrain without a friendly fortification, their artillery factors are going to be halved. And so we look at what does a single corps with 6 strength points give the French. And so it's 2 for the corps, 1 for every 2 strength points. So 6 divided, basically 6 has 3 groups of 2. So it's going to be 5 strength points halved, which is 2 rounded, or 3 rounded down to 2. We apply the same to the Prussians. Note that the cavalry aren't considered for artillery or combat odds. They'll affect the combat in a different way. They can take losses from the infantry CRT fire, but cavalry cannot take artillery losses. So in this case, you have the 7th Corps and the 1st Army. The Army gives 2 artillery strength, the corps 3, and then for every 2 Prussian infantry SPs, they also gain 2. And so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of 2, so that's going to be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So the Prussians enter the combat with 9 strength points and 13 artillery. Now for the leaders, you see the corps leader has a 0 tactical, and the army leaders don't have tactical rating, they have an army rating, and it's on the middle right. And in this case, von Steinmetz is not a good army leader. He actually has a -1, and that's actually going to help the French. We'll get into that later. So this is our tail of the tape, so to speak. French 6 strength points to artillery, Prussians 9 strength points and 13 artillery. So, step 1 of the combat sequence, and this is actually final art from Tim for the player aid. So, first we check for overrun. If there's 12 to 1 in SPs, there isn't, and then we resolve artillery, which is why I sort of worked that calculation in. So it's going to be 13 versus 2. See, these are not playtest, or these are playtest graphics, they're not final graphics for the artillery table and modifiers. So the French will be rolling on the 2 table, the Prussians will roll on the 12. It's done simultaneously. You determine any DRMs. The Prussians will have a net +3. They get +2 simply for being Prussian, and they're more accurate artillery. And both sides are in clear terrain. You're always going to have the same terrain for both units. So clear terrain would be +1 for each. The French roll well and get an 11, which becomes 12, so they peg out the table. And the Prussians also roll fairly well with an 8, which brings up to an 11. And so let's look at these individual results. The French have a +2, 1, and then a dash, basically. The +2 is a DRM for the upcoming combat. The 1 is the number of strength points to be lost immediately, so it will affect odds. And then if it is shaded red or has a D, both are used to denote this, then there's a demoralization of that side. So for the Prussians, they inflict 1.5 step losses and demoralize the French. So the half step loss is essentially the French roll a die. On a 4 or 6, they lose an additional strength point. As it turns out, they only roll a 3, so each side loses 1 strength point. Each side gains a +2 DRM, and then the French are going to also gain a demoralization that will be applied at the end of the combat, and this is going to be important. So we immediately implement the losses. We put a demoralization marker on the 4th Corps, but we know that in terms of combat strengths or what have you, it's not going to apply until after the CRT resolution. Okay, step 3 after artillery is calculate initial odds. So, for odds of pairs, there's 2 ways we calculate the odds. If it's less than 1 to 2 or greater than 2 to 1, you just use the simple odds, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, etc. If you're between 1 to 2 and 2 to 1, you instead look at the differential. So we take 8 minus 5, attacker minus defender, and we end up with the +3 column. The only modifier is going to be the minor river, which is a 1 left shift in the French's favor. And then we look at cavalry superiority. So we apply the modifiers for terrain and then cavalry superiority. So cavalry superiority, basically both sides roll 1d6 and add the number of cavalry steps involved. In this case, the Prussians are adding +4 and the French are adding 0. Predictably, the French roll higher and they gain cavalry superiority, which grants them a +1 DRM. Now, if you have cavalry superiority, you can sort of push your luck with the cavalry and attempt to gain a column shift as well. You have to roll a d6 again and get equal to or less than the difference in cavalry steps. So in this case, 4 minus 0 would mean the Prussians have to roll a 4 or less to gain a column shift. If they gain the shift, however, cavalry have to be every odd numbered loss. So 1st, 3rd, 5th, etc. However, they roll a 6 and basically they fail to get the column shift, but they still qualify for the DRM. So there's a busy slide, but basically just showing what we worked through. You get up to the columns and you're going to look at column shifts and look at DRM. So let's look at the column shifts first. So we started on the +3 column, and the only column shift that is applicable is the -1 left for the Hexide terrain, which is the minor river. Had the cavalry shift been obtained, then it would have shifted back up to the +3, +4 column. Now we look at DRMs for the French. They gained a +2 from artillery. The Germans suffer from this infantry assault penalty, much like the French suffer from the artillery fuse penalty early in the game. This is one of the things that the players will roll 2d6 after certain combats to see if the penalty is removed. So it's removed somewhat randomly. And of course, obviously the quicker it is removed, the better it is for that player. So the French get that modifier, and then the French also have that +1 from their leader, their admiral. So they will have a net +5. Now the Prussians end up with only a +3, +2 for artillery, +1 for the cavalry, and this is because their leader has a 0 tactical rating. Now, so the net effect is going to be the French are going to roll 2d6 and consult the same column as the Prussians, but Prussians will roll separately and have a +3. And because the army leader, von Steinmetz, has a -1 rating, that grants the French the ability to re-roll either their roll or force the Prussians to re-roll. And that's basically the way the army rating works. If it's positive, then the side with the leader gets to decide on the re-roll. If it's negative, then it allows the other side to decide on the re-rolls. So, French roll a 9, which with their +5 becomes 13+, and the Prussians roll an 8 with their +3 becomes an 11. So you look at this and say, oh my gosh, how do we make out these results? Do I have it blown up? I do, okay. So you have basically 6 results in each box. And at the top is an S, in the middle is M, and the bottom is L. And that is related to the size of the force doing the firing, or size of the force rolling the die. So in this particular case, both sides are medium because they each have 4 to 12 strength points. So sort of what I say here, and then the French will look under the ATT side to determine their result on the attacker. The Prussians will look on the DEF side to determine their result on the defender. So if we look at this, the French inflict a D3 on the Prussians, and the Prussians inflict a D3 on the French. Or I have it here, the French suffer what's in yellow, and the Prussians suffer what is in blue. Now, you notice D3 is the highest, the best / worst result possible, depending on how who's being either receiving the result or giving the result. So the French decide they're going to have the Prussians re-roll. And they roll a 6 now, which becomes a 9, which actually changes the result to a D2. The D means that both sides are demoralized, and then the number, the 2 or the 3, is the number of strength points that are lost. And that's what we now do, is apply losses. The French only have the 4th Corps, so that loses the 2 strength points. And the Prussians have to lose 3 strength points. They take 1 each on their cavalry divisions, so they flip them over to the 1 out of 2 strength point side. And they also take 1 strength point loss on the 7th Corps. And then each side takes their demoralizations. So what's next? Leader casualties. Basically, you're going to roll 2d6, and if you don't, if you roll low, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the size of your force, then you need to roll again to see if there's a possible casualty. Most of the time, you're going to roll the 2d6, and there will not be a leader casualty, and you move to the next step, battle impact. So in battle impact, again, each side rolls 2d6, defender first. There are certain modifiers, your leader rating, army leader tactical, the terrain and the hex has a modifier. If you're attacking multiple sides, it can lead to bad results. And then the effect that your opponent's artillery had on you is applied as a negative modifier. So in this case, the only modifiers we have are going to be artillery. Each side has a net -2 for that. And the minor river. The defender will add +1, and the attacker will have -1. And then there will be leader effects as well. The French eventually end up with a net 0 modifier, +1 for the river and the leader, -2 for artillery. They roll a 5, which is basically no effect. Some of the effects of battle impact for the defender is basically you can retreat extra hexes, you could potentially remove your demoralization, you could force another round of combat if you wanted to. And these are similar to what you're going to see on the attacker's roll, except instead of gaining extra retreat hexes, you can gain extra advances of combat. Now, unfortunately, the Prussians, because they have such a poor leader and also were crossing the river, they had a net -4 modifier. So they rolled an 8, which became a 4. Now, you notice on this 2 or less, there's an attacker failure chart, and it's similar to the defender failure chart if the defender rolls poorly. And these are things like extra step losses, maybe the other side gets to recover a step loss, maybe you have to retreat more hexes, or the other side can activate a unit that's nearby to sort of move as sort of like a reaction move to get a free move. These are sort of the things that would occur on the failure charts. So after that, you determine the victor, and it's relatively easy. Just follow the order that's listed. If one side is eliminated, the other side wins. If one side uses their cavalry to avoid a round of combat, then the other side wins. And eventually we work our way down to demoralizations, which is going to be one of the most common ways to determine victors in combat. So if one side's demoralized, the other isn't, the non-demoralized side wins. If one side has more demoralizations than the other, then the side with the least number of demoralizations is the victor. And that's what we have here. The Prussians with only one demoralization are the victor because the French have two. So, because of that, we then resolve the demoralizations. For every demoralization above 1, you pull off the marker and incur a step loss. So the French lose one more strength point. I'm sorry, not step loss, a strength point loss. And then they must retreat. And so they retreat basically 1 hex back, and they are marked demoralized. And you can see the Prussians are also marked demoralized. So if after we resolve the end of status checks, which is basically seeing if the time fuse is removed or the infantry assault penalty, maybe the French Empire leader gets recalled, the Prussians could expend their last movement point. Now, if they weren't demoralized, maybe they would actually go and initiate combat again on the 4th Corps. And the 4th Corps would have to try to hope that it reacted successfully to get away, otherwise it would be at a significant disadvantage. However, given that the Prussians are also demoralized, they will likely just stay in the hex that they are at. So as I mentioned, you check to see if there's different penalties. If the French lost more strength points than the Prussians, the French army leader might get sacked, so they have to roll for that. If you have a corps leader that has an equivalent named army leader, that army leader gets put on the reinforcement track, entered as a reinforcement, so that if you promote a leader to an army rank or you create a new army, you could draw that new army leader, basically promoting the corps leader. And then there's certain victory point checks that you make to see if the empire falls, if there's victory point penalties. And that's basically combat. So, okay, at first it looks quite complicated. I understand this. In truth, though, once you start working through some of these combats, you'll find that it actually is fairly straightforward. It's just something that once you get used to it, you'll see, okay, do you have 12 more odds? Most of the time the answer will be no. Okay, do your artillery. Determine your strength, roll 2d6, apply step losses, determine your CRT odds. Resolve your cavalry. Just roll a d6, see who rolls higher, decide if they want to risk their cavalry by going after a shift. Then you look at any column shifts or DRMs for the combat, and you each roll 2d6 and apply the step losses and any demoralizations. Then you roll to see if there's army leaders. You re-roll if there's army leaders and apply the strength point losses. Leader loss, battle impact, again, many times you're going to roll and it's just not going to, you roll high enough so you don't have to worry about checking for leader loss. And for battle impact, either you're just going to get an extra hex of retreat, which maybe you don't even want to take, but maybe you do. And they will add very little in terms of the time because you'll just have one look at the chart and you'll know exactly what the extra results are from the battle impact. And some of these battle impact results can be fairly critical, especially if you happen to roll extremes. That's basically what you'll see for the battle impact and the leader loss. Leader loss, if you roll an extreme on the low side. For battle impact, if you roll extremes on the high or low side. And then you determine victor, retreats, advances, resolve extra demoralizations if there's more than one. And that's it. And so it's something where, again, once you start playing and you start resolving these combats, you'll see that it actually resolves fairly quickly. And it is fairly intuitive in terms of players will know when they want to fight and when they don't. And because they can react, a lot of times you'll have potential combats where one side is at a distinct disadvantage. It won't happen because the side that is at distinct advantage will be able to react away. And not always. You can see that The French reaction rolls, they need to roll well sometimes. Core, they need a 5 or higher. So you're not going to always react away, but there will be times where you're able to successfully avoid a combat that would not go well for you. And hopefully this gives you a good feel of how combat works in On to Paris. And as always, if there's questions, either post at Board Game Geek or Consum World, and either Milan or myself will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.